Her daughter called from the stairs. "Try not to embarrass us tonight." Frances O'Connell, retired RN and widow, didn't reply. She fastened the emerald necklace Lauren once priced, but never owned. By morning, the Lexus would be gone, the title erased, and Lauren's grip with it. She'd spent years walking 3 steps behind. Now she'd walk out the front door with the last word clasped around her neck. "We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from." It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The zipper snagged. Lauren gave a sigh as sharp as the diamond studs she wore, and tugged the collar of Frances's navy evening jacket into place. "There," she said, brushing invisible lint off Frances's shoulder like she was prepping a mannequin. "Just try not to embarrass us tonight, okay?" Frances didn't answer. She simply looked past her daughter's reflection and toward her own in the mirror. Her face, lined but elegant, set in calm stone, didn't flicker. Not at the jab, not at the implication, not at the faint scent of Lauren's oversprayed designer perfume that always made Frances think of plastic roses. She adjusted a single stray strand of her silvery hair behind her ear and turned toward the velvet handbag sitting on the dresser. Her hand hovered above it for a moment before lifting it gently by the strap. Downstairs, heels echoed like warning bells on the hardwood. David stood by the door, checking his smartwatch. "Frances," he said without looking up, "just let the young folks do the talking tonight. Easier for everyone." She nodded once, just enough to qualify as an answer, and followed them out the door. In the back seat of the black Lincoln Town car, leather still cold despite the evening's heat, Frances quietly unlatched the brass clasp on her bag and ran her fingers along the velvet case inside. She didn't open it, just touched it, like a secret she'd kept warm for years. Carly, already half scrolling through her phone, glanced up. "You look beautiful, Grandma." Frances turned, lips softening. "Thank you, sweetheart." Lauren, in the front seat, adjusted the rearview mirror. "Make sure your necklace's clasp isn't crooked, Mom. Cameras are everywhere at these things." Frances's gaze returned to the velvet case. She said nothing. The ballroom at the Arden Heights Civic Club glittered with glassware and ego. Music played, tasteful and restrained. Everything smelled faintly of over-polished silver and catered asparagus. Frances walked 3 steps behind, as she always did, feeling more like an accessory than a guest. Lauren led the charge through the reception, lips pressed into a permanent campaign smile, her arm hooked in David's like an ornament. She stopped to shake hands with a state assemblywoman, immediately folding Frances into the group with a stiff, "This is my mother. She lives with us." Not, "She helped pay for this entire wing." Not, "She's the reason we ever belonged here." Just, "She lives with us." Frances extended a hand, which was accepted out of politeness, not interest. As she opened her mouth to speak, Lauren smoothly cut in. "She's been sentimental about these events ever since Dad passed. Always loved dressing up." The woman nodded politely and turned away before Frances could form a second word. Three more interruptions. Each time Frances stepped slightly to the side, giving Lauren room. Each time she found herself speaking only to someone's shoulder, their attention already stolen by wine, politics, or Lauren's curated charm. At one point, she glanced across the room and caught Brenda Lee watching her from near the silent auction table, a glass of Chardonnay in hand. Brenda gave a small, knowing raise of her brow, something between a salute and a nudge. Frances smiled barely. Dinner was announced with a chime. Lauren took David's arm. "Mom, you're at table 12 with Carly." The donor list got mixed. Frances didn't argue. She never did. But as she walked toward her assigned seat, she let one hand dip into her handbag and curled gently around the velvet case again. Carly was already seated. She looked up, a half smile blooming. "They've been talking about the auction necklace all night," Carly whispered. "Bet it won't even come close to yours." Frances slid into her seat, her eyes steady on the head table, where Lauren was already mid-laugh with a local board chair. Frances placed the bag gently in her lap. Her fingers closed once more around the case. The clasp clicked softly open. The sun over Sacramento was already sharp when Frances stepped out onto the back patio, the morning air carrying that brittle tension of a house that looked peaceful only from the street. She held her phone in one hand, the other gently stirring a cup of Earl Grey, steam curling upward like an afterthought. Alicia's voice came through the speaker, calm and clipped as always. Francis, the car title still shows only your name. Insurance too. It's legally loaned, not transferred. Francis stirred the tea once more, then set the spoon down with a faint click. Good. Can we arrange pickup by tomorrow? A soft pause. I'll call the service. Want discretion? Francis's eyes drifted toward the driveway, where the black Lexus gleamed like a trophy under the bougainvillea vine. Always. The call ended. Francis reached for her garden clippers, trimming a single rose that had grown too heavy for its own stem. She left the rest untouched. By Sunday, the brunch table was set like something out of a lifestyle blog. Linen napkin, smoked salmon fanned over glass, small pitchers of mimosa already sweating from the sun. Francis sat at the far end, half a world away from the laughter. Lauren waved her fork like a baton. Honestly, David's driving your car more than you are. We might as well put him on the title. She laughed, head thrown back for effect. David chuckled dutifully, eyes flicking toward Francis, then quickly away. Francis took a sip of tea, then gently stirred again, even though there was nothing left to dissolve. She didn't reply. Carly, seated beside her, shot a glance down the table, then leaned in. Her voice was low but certain. They always talk like you're not sitting here. Francis smiled faintly. I've gotten used to it. But why do they treat you like this? Francis set her spoon down again. It made the smallest sound against the porcelain, barely audible, but somehow final. She looked at Carly, not with sadness, but with a strange serenity. Because I let them. The girl's brow furrowed. She seemed to want to ask more, but Lauren was already rising, chair legs scraping dramatically, as she motioned for Carly to help clear. Carly glanced back as she walked away, her eyes sticking to Francis like something unspoken had just passed between. Left alone, Francis picked up her phone, typed a brief message, and hit send. Service confirmed. Vehicle pickup, Mon 8 a.m. She stared at the screen for a moment, then locked it and slid it back into her purse. That evening, as twilight bruised the edges of the sky, she sat on the edge of her bed in the guest, the same room she had once designed for temporary visitors, now quietly repurposed as her own. On the nightstand sat a small cedar box. She opened it, took out a set of keys, and laid them on a white envelope bearing the family's shared address. The keys to the Lexus. She didn't plan to hand them over. Down the hall, she could hear Lauren laughing into the phone. Something performative as usual. No, she's just being dramatic, Lauren said, getting all possessive in her old age. Frances smiled to herself. Old age was the most underestimated disguise in the world. She closed the cedar box, stood slowly, and walked it to her closet. Then, as if by instinct, she reached for her handbag and unzipped the side pocket. The velvet necklace case was still inside, untouched since the gala. Her fingers brushed over it once before she closed the bag again. The invitation arrived on thick cardstock, embossed with gold scrollwork, Arden Heights Benefactors Circle. Annual Spring Gala. Lauren left it on the counter like it was meant to be admired, not read. Frances picked it up, scanned the date, and folded it once, cleanly before sliding it into her book like a bookmark. She didn't ask for a ride. She didn't need to. By the time Lauren knocked on her guest suite door that evening, mascara flawless, lips a shade too bold, Frances was already dressed, navy silk, a higher neckline than fashion dictated, and around her collarbone emeralds, real ones. They glinted with depth, deep green stones set in antique white gold, cool against her skin but burning under the lamplight. The necklace had been a 25th anniversary gift from her late husband, tucked away in a safe deposit box for decades. Frances stood as Lauren entered. She didn't turn. She didn't speak. Lauren's eyes landed on the necklace and froze. Is that? Her voice trailed off, eyes narrowing. Frances adjusted the clasp without looking at her. Yes, Lauren blinked. I didn't know you still had that. I never stopped having it. They drove in silence. David commented on the traffic. Lauren replied too quickly. Frances looked out the window and let the weight of the emeralds anchor her. They weren't loud, but they didn't have to be. Inside the ballroom, Under the cascade of chandeliers and ambition, Frances moved like a storm that hadn't started yet. A tall man in a gray suit approached her near the bar. "That's quite the piece," he said, gesturing toward her necklace. "Vintage?" Frances gave a small smile. "Timeless." Lauren appeared at her side like a reflex. "Oh, she's always been sentimental," she said with a laugh. "Just dug it out for fun." Frances didn't correct her. She just let the man's eyes linger on the emeralds, then on her face, as if something didn't quite match Lauren's tone. Later, near the dessert table, Carly slid beside her. "You should have seen her face," she whispered. Frances didn't ask whose. She already knew. That Monday, Alicia sat across from her in a discreet financial services office on El Camino Avenue, the walls lined with silent security cameras and frosted glass doors. "She's never insured it?" Alicia asked, holding a jeweler's appraisal. "Didn't need to," Frances replied. "Nobody knew it was still mine. They filed the paperwork, vaulted protection, digital logs, emergency access coded to Frances and Alicia only." "Smart," Alicia said, sealing the documents into an envelope. Wearing it now was a move. Frances smiled without smiling. Wasn't for them, just a reminder. Back at home, Frances moved quietly through the guest suite, her hands deliberate, her decisions invisible. From the nightstand, she packed away old letters. From the closet, she folded dresses into linen garment bags. She boxed the wedding china she hadn't touched in 10 years, sealed photo albums, pulled one drawer empty, and ran a cloth through it, like she was erasing her own ghost. Outside the room, the house still buzzed with Lauren's curated routines, a podcast on branding, a phone call with her Pilates instructor, a laugh that didn't quite reach its target. Frances didn't interrupt. She simply packed. The knock wasn't polite. It was rushed, hard, unpracticed, Lauren's performance mask slipping before she even opened the door to Frances's guests. She didn't wait for a reply. "Where is the car?" she snapped, her voice already trembling with a mix of disbelief and fury. Frances stood by the window, folding a sweater into a box labeled winter. She didn't flinch. She didn't turn. "Gone," she said, smoothing the sweater flat with one hand. "Back where it belongs." Lauren's heels clicked furiously against the hardwood as she stepped farther into the room. "What the hell does that mean?" Frances closed the box lid slowly and turned around. "With the owner." "You're being ridiculous," Lauren hissed. "You could have just asked us to drive you more, or God at least talk to me. David uses that car for work, for meetings." Frances's face remained unreadable. He should have used his own title for that. David appeared in the doorway behind her, as if summoned by tension. "Let's all just take a breath," he said gently. "No one's trying to disrespect anyone here. Maybe there was a miscommunication." "Title," Frances said, looking directly at him, "supersedes comfort." He blinked once, then stepped back. Lauren stared at her mother like she was seeing her for the first time, not the soft, accommodating background figure she'd grown used to controlling, but someone else entirely, someone older, sharper, and no longer on mute. "You can't just make decisions behind our backs," Lauren said, her tone wobbling between rage and panic. Frances tilted her head, almost with curiosity. "I didn't. You just stopped noticing the ones I already made." Before Lauren could reply, a knock echoed again, this one measured, composed. Brenda stood at the entry, holding a thick manila folder. "Morning," she said, breezing in like a legal breeze in pastel linen. "Sorry to drop in unannounced, but I thought you might want this back." She handed Frances the folder. The seal was fresh, still crisp at the corners. Frances opened it just enough to see the notarized document. Power of attorney updated, signed, and legally airtight. Lauren's eyes flicked to it and narrowed. "What is that?" Brenda turned to her, tone sweet but barbed. "Protection. You know how things get at our age. Forgetful, frail, vulnerable. Good thing Frances isn't any of those." Lauren let out a disbelieving laugh. "You've got to be kidding me." From the staircase, small footsteps creaked. Carly stood halfway down, silent, barefoot, arms crossed over the railing. Her eyes didn't move. She was watching everything, memorizing it. Frances met her gaze for a long, quiet moment. Neither smiled. Then Lauren's voice broke the stillness, already traveling down her phone as she walked into the hallway. No, I swear she's unraveling. Brenda's feeding it probably. Some weird late-life control trip. It's like she thinks she's the queen of the house now or something. Frances turned back toward the window. She didn't react. Brenda stepped beside her, lowering her voice. You okay? Frances looked outside, past the trimmed hedges and the place where the Lexus used to sit. She exhaled like she'd just finished a sentence. Just pruning the dead limbs. Alicia didn't speak right away. She just turned the document around on the mahogany desk so Frances could read the bolded heading at the top. Life Estate Deed, O'Connell, Frances M. Then she tapped her manicured nail once on the fine print near the bottom. Still yours, she said. The land, the structure, everything. They may have painted the walls and replaced the fixtures, but legally, the house is built on your shadow. Frances nodded once. There was no gloating in her expression, no satisfaction, just recognition. Like remembering a name she hadn't spoken in years. Transfer on death clause? She asked. Her voice calm, but pointed. I've already drafted it, Alicia said. All we need is your signature and a witness. Frances reached for the pen without pause. 2 days later, Lauren paced the kitchen, fuming over a bill she didn't recognize. Why is PG&E in our name now? She barked, waving the envelope like it was an accusation. And the garbage company? This is some clerical glitch, right? David looked up from his laptop, frowning. I mean, maybe they updated records? Or maybe it lapsed from her account? Frances sipped her tea at the breakfast table, a crossword open in front of her. She didn't look up. I always thought utilities should match the user, she said softly. Don't you? Lauren ignored her. Frances filled in a 6-letter word for reclaim, retake. At the post office that afternoon, she stood in line behind a woman mailing graduation announcement. Frances's manila envelope was thicker, heavier. When she passed it across the counter, she triple-checked the certified label, Thomas and Kendricks LLP, Estate Law Division. Inside was a draft for emergency repossession of the property, quietly prepared, quietly filed, just in case. The clerk asked if she wanted a receipt. Frances smiled. Yes, please. That evening, the house was abuzz with tension masquerading as normal. Lauren grilled chicken on the deck, her movements sharp, her laughter forced. David talked about refinancing again. I've emailed Chase, he said, sipping a beer. Might need a second look at the equity options, though. Their system's flagging something about unclear ownership paths. Frances turned a page in her book and didn't say a word. Lauren snapped. Mom, can you at least pretend to engage when we talk about things that affect the whole family? Frances didn't look up. I'm listening, I just stopped agreeing. David raised his eyebrows. Lauren bit the inside of her cheek. Carly sat at the far end of the patio, earbuds in but not playing anything. Her eyes kept flicking toward Frances, then away, like she was tracking a quiet weather change no one else could feel. That night, Frances lit a single taper candle on the desk in her guest suite, placed the newly notarized documents beside the flame, and watched the flicker reflect off the phrase transfer on death beneficiary. Carly Wells. No ceremony, no announcement, just the weight of permanence. Then she opened her laptop and clicked through the family's shared financial logins. One by one, she removed her name from every joint account. Bank, brokerage, water bill, trash, home alarm system. Gone. It was like deleting a ghost from the house. The invitation came by text. Not a call, not a knock, just a cheerful group message sent at 7:41 a.m. Lauren's Sunday brunch. Just us and a few close people. Patio style. Mom, can you help in the kitchen beforehand? Need your biscuits. Frances stared at the message, then locked her phone and went back to slicing strawberries. She added nothing to the thread. By noon on Sunday, the house smelled like sage sausage and overbaked ambition. Lauren bustled through the kitchen in a lemon-colored dress, layering fake warmth over tight control. Every movement of hers had the cadence of a lifestyle vlog, curated, rehearsed, deeply concerned with angles. Frances worked quietly near the stove, her hands dusted with flour, biscuits rising in the oven like they were still worth something. Could you stay back here during the meal? Lauren asked, not even glancing up. We're short on chairs and it's just optics. You get it. Frances nodded once. She'd gotten it for a long time. The brunch unfolded with the usual theater. Lauren at center, Carly pretending to scroll on her phone, David half checked out. The guests rotated through topics like headlines, rising interest rates, charter schools, their vacation plans for Carmel. Frances served mimosas and cleared plates with the kind of grace that made her invisible. Brenda arrived halfway through, her presence unannounced, her sundress defiantly wrinkled. She stood for a moment at the patio's edge, watching as Frances poured orange juice into crystal, ignored. Carly leaned over when no one was listening. "You should be at the table." Frances looked at her granddaughter and smiled faintly. They only set places for image, not for presence. Carly's face darkened. "I hate how she acts around you." Frances patted her hand lightly. "She doesn't know she's acting." Later that evening, the dishwasher hummed in the background as Frances sat at her desk in the guest suite, pen in hand. The paper before her was blank, only for a moment. Last will and testament of Frances M. O'Connell, line by line. She unhooked Lauren from the future. No executor rights, no inheritances, no fallback claims. Her name disappeared from every clause like smoke from a candle. Frances paused only once, to write Carly Wells in permanent ink. The next morning, she mailed a small package from the post office downtown. The clerk, recognizing her, offered a friendly nod. Inside the padded envelope was a slim book. Every dollar tells a story, dog-eared in a few chapters. Frances had underlined a passage on page 83. "Legacy is what you choose to protect, not what others expect to." Tucked in the back was a handwritten note. "For your eyes only. Read slowly, then lock it up. Grandma." She didn't wait for Carly's reaction. Brenda arrived that afternoon with a black carry case and a sealed manila envelope. "I emptied it," Frances said, as she handed over the key. "Old safety deposit box downtown. Photos, policies, insurance backups, all of it." Brenda opened the envelope, flipped through its contents briefly, then looked up. "This is real," she said, "not symbolic. You're really cutting her out." Frances folded her arms. She already cut herself out. "I'm just catching the paper up." Brenda didn't smile. She didn't need to. "You sure?" Frances nodded. "I've been sure. Just took a while to stop apologizing for it." Frances was folding towels in neat practiced thirds when the landline rang from the corner table by the bay window. It was the kind of quiet domestic task that didn't demand attention, but invited reflection. Muscle memory guided her hands, while her thoughts drifted to the will tucked safely in her drawer and the velvet pouch beside it. She paused, wiped her palms on her skirt, and answered on the third ring. "Mrs. O'Connell," a man's voice asked. "This is Brian Patterson from Valley Ridge Bank. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." She sat down on the edge of the armchair, smoothing a hand over her lap. "Not at all," she said. "I'll be brief," he continued, his tone polite but cautiously precise. "There was a home equity application filed under Lauren Wells, your daughter. It prompted a secondary review due to the property's legal structure. When our underwriting team pulled title, we saw the life estate deed. It still lists you as the sole holder." Frances's gaze moved to the patio door, where the bougainvillea vines swayed lightly in the afternoon. "Yes," she said after a moment. "That's correct." She listed herself as the homeowner, he added. Indicated that she and her husband had full authority over the house. "But legally, that's not what we're seeing." Frances didn't answer immediately. She allowed the silence to stretch just long enough for him to understand she wasn't surprised. "She's been confused about more than that," she said finally, her voice calm and even. Brian hesitated, perhaps unsure how to respond. "We'll be denying the application, of course, but I wanted to reach out directly out of respect. Your estate files are meticulous. Everything in your name is locked down tighter than most. Just thought you'd want to know." "I appreciate the courtesy," she replied, "and the clarity." He thanked her, offered a courteous farewell, and disconnected the call. Frances placed the receiver back in its cradle, then stood and resumed, folding the towels, her hands steady, the rhythm unbothered. The quiet hum of power done right, the kind that didn't need to shout, filled the room like warm light. That evening, the kitchen carried the smell of pan-seared chicken and lemon, but no one at the dinner table seemed interested in the food. Lauren sat rigid in her chair, her glass of white wine untouched, fingers tapping restlessly against the base of Her smile was absent, and her charm, usually laid on like paint, had been stripped bare by frustration. She could no longer continue. David tried to make conversation about remodeling costs and refinance rates, but his voice trailed off with each. Carly barely touched her salad, her expression wary and distant. Frances, however, was composed, her knife gliding through a roasted carrot, with gentle, measured strokes. Midway through the meal, Lauren pushed her plate aside and turned toward her mother. "You could have told the bank to go ahead with the application," she said abruptly, her voice clipped. Frances didn't look up right away. When she did, her gaze was neutral, but her eyes carried something cool beneath the surface. "I wasn't consulted before it was filed," she said. "Why would I interfere with a denial?" Lauren's jaw clenched. "It's not interference. It's family. We needed those funds for improvements. A second HVAC unit, new windows, things this place actually needs. It's still my place," Frances replied, her tone not sharp, but unmovable. "Improvements don't equal entitlement." "God," Lauren said, standing up from the table now. "You act like everything you've done is some great gift we've been missing." "I act like it's mine," Frances said, finally setting down her fork. "Because it is." David muttered something about needing to check a work email and left the table without making eye contact. Lauren remained standing, arms crossed, simmering. "Why won't you just let us take care of things?" she asked, her voice thinner now. Frances exhaled slowly. "Because you only take," she said, and then returned to her plate as though the conversation had already ended. Carly's chair scraped softly as she stood. She didn't follow either parent. Instead, she drifted toward Frances, wrapping both arms around her grandmother's shoulders. Her hug wasn't dramatic or performative, just firm and present. "You're not invisible," she whispered. Frances laid one hand on Carly's and gave it a gentle squeeze. "I know," she replied. Frances waited until the house had gone quiet, until Lauren's voice had receded behind a closed bedroom door and David's footsteps had faded upstairs. Even Carly had drifted into sleep. The hum of her phone screen, the last glow beneath her blanket before darkness took the room. The stillness wasn't eerie. It was earned. A silence that finally belonged to her. She stood in the middle of her suite and looked around. There wasn't much left to pack. She'd been removing herself piece by piece for weeks. Books reshelved, jewelry locked away, documents transferred and filed. All that remained were a few sweaters, 2 framed photos, and a wool coat she hadn't worn since February. She laid 2 suitcases flat across the bed and began folding what she wanted to take. Not what she needed. She had made peace with the difference, but what still mattered. The hand-stitched quilt from her mother's attic. Carly's graduation announcement from middle school, tucked neatly between her travel journal pages. A gold pen from her husband's desk, long out of ink, but kept anyway. The emerald necklace stayed behind, locked in its velvet case, resting inside the desk drawer with her updated will and Brenda's notarized envelope. Frances had already made arrangements. Alicia would collect it by week's end. By the time the sun rose, the guest suite looked like a room freshly painted for staging, too clean, too neat, as if no one had ever truly lived there. She left a note taped to the inside of the closet door, written in crisp cursive. "All utilities now in your name. Do not forward mail. Please leave Carly out of it. F." She didn't knock on doors. She didn't leave goodbyes. She didn't explain herself. She simply walked out the front door with both suitcases in hand, locking it gently behind her. Brenda's cottage was 35 minutes away, tucked just past a winding drive near the American River, shaded by redwoods and draped in ivy that had gone undisturbed for decades. It wasn't fancy. The roof sagged a little in the corners, and the floorboards creaked like they were old friends, greeting each footstep, but there was coffee on the stove and warmth in the walls. "Same room as always," Brenda said, taking one suitcase before Frances could protest. "Linens are fresh, fireplace still moody." Frances ran her hand along the edge of the mantel as she entered. It was quiet and it was hers. Not borrowed, not tolerated, offered. She sat down on the edge of the bed, listening to the water moving in the distance. Outside, life would carry on without her announcement. She would not be missed at any networking brunch or charity committee. The power of her absence wasn't in the space she left. It was in the fact that no one had expected her to leave at all. By mid-morning, Lauren's texts began. Mom, are you out? Did you go somewhere? Why are your drawers empty? Are you serious right now? You can't just leave. Where did you go? This is childish. Call me back. We have things to discuss. Don't ignore me. Frances read none of them. Her phone was left face down on the nightstand, turned to silent. Brenda glanced at it once and muttered, "Must be nice to be needed only when you're missing." Carly, however, knew. By late afternoon, David's number appeared on her phone instead. "Where is she?" he asked. His voice wasn't angry, just tired, worn in that way guilt sometimes sounded when it arrived too late. Carly didn't hesitate. "She's where she's respected," she said, and then hung up. That night, Frances sat by the fireplace in Brenda's living room with a glass of wine in one hand and a legal pad on her lap. The flames crackled softly, illuminating the page where she'd written 4 lines in clean, deliberate handwriting. To Thomas Kendall, Esquire. Please activate the possession clause if any contest or claim is filed. No further contact is necessary. All prior statements stand. Frances O'Connell. She folded the letter, slid it into an envelope, and sealed it shut. There was no uncertainty, no tremble in the ink. Then, in the quiet that followed, she logged into her estate portal online and opened a new trust account. Not in Lauren's name, not in David's, not in any O'Connell-Wells hybrid designation they might later try to reclaim. She typed the name Rebecca Carly Wells into the beneficiary field and clicked confirm. The notice went live on a Tuesday morning. Frances had uploaded the file with Alicia's help, triple-checked every name, clause, and timestamp. Then, with a click that neither trembled nor paused, she filed the trust transfer and full estate restructure with the Sacramento County Public Register. It was bureaucratic, bloodless, and irreversible. By 10:30, the digital record populated. Frances M. O'Connell Trust, restructured, beneficiary. Rebecca Carly Wells, previous dependent designations, voided as of date signed. No announcement was made, no warning given. Just a line of cold, public truth waiting in a database for the curious, the bored, or the vindictive to stumble across. Frances closed her laptop and poured herself another cup of black coffee. The mug was chipped at the rim, the way old things are when they've outlasted everyone's expectations. She drank slowly. The morning sun fell through Brenda's lace curtains like a hush. By noon, someone found it. Lauren burst into the kitchen, phone in hand, mouth already moving before the screen even dimmed. "Look at this," she said, shoving it toward David. "Lynn from the gala committee just sent it to me," she said, and I quote, "Did you see your mom's trust isn't listing you anymore? Thought it was a typo." A typo. David scrolled through the link, slowly, his brow furrowed. "Is this real?" "Of course it's real," Lauren snapped. She filed it publicly. Publicly, David. Like she wanted people to see it. Like she's trying to humiliate me. He sat down at the kitchen island and ran a hand over his face. "Jesus, what do you want to do?" "I want to fix it," she said, pacing now. "I'll call Alicia, or the clerk's office, or her lawyer. Someone has to know what the hell she's doing." Carly, who had been sitting at the edge of the staircase with her phone face down beside her, finally spoke. "She's not doing anything to you," she said quietly. "She's just done including you." Lauren turned sharply. "Excuse me?" Carly stood, walked over, and placed a folded printout on the kitchen counter. "It's going around school too. People are talking." Lauren unfolded the paper. It was a black and white copy of the official record, printed straight from the county archive. Frances's name at the top. Carly's name beneath it. Lauren's name nowhere. "She doesn't care if people talk," Carly said, turning to leave. "She wants them to read." Back at the cottage, Frances sat on the porch swing, arms folded around a fleece blanket Brenda had left out that morning. A soft breeze rustled the leaves above her, and the air smelled faintly of river stone and chamomile. Her phone buzzed 3 times in a row, same number each time. She didn't answer. Then, a 4th time, David's name. She sighed, then pressed accept, holding the phone just away from her ear for a moment before she spoke. "Hello?" His voice was strained. "Careful." "Frances, look, I know tensions are high. I just think maybe we should all meet halfway. Just talk. The house, the trust, the family. It's a lot. Maybe we can figure something out." Frances listened, not interrupting. When he paused, waiting for her response, she answered with the same restraint she'd once used teaching Carly how to slice an apple with a paring knife. Halfway, she said slowly, is still too much for people who never moved. David didn't reply. The line clicked quiet. That evening, Brenda drove Frances out to Oak Glen Cemetery, where the air always held a damp quiet and the trees leaned just enough to soften the sunlight. They walked the gravel path in silence until they reached a modest, gray granite stone near the far edge. Michael O'Connell, 1949-2007. Husband, father, builder. Frances knelt beside it and brushed a few pine needles off the base. She didn't cry. She hadn't in years. Her grief had calcified long ago. What remained was maintenance, not mourning. I finally put it all in order, she whispered, placing a folded copy of the new trust at the base of the headstone. I wish you'd seen how crooked it got, but I think you'd like how straight I made it. She stood, stepped back, and took one long look. Brenda waited at the path's edge. When Frances turned, they walked back together. The courtroom wasn't grand, but it had the stillness of a place where decisions outlived their speakers. Pale light slanted through vertical blinds behind the bench, striping the room in bars of gray. Wood-paneled walls soaked up every whisper. Even the ticking of the courtroom clock seemed to hesitate before each second passed. Frances sat with her hands, resting lightly on the edge of the long oak table, palms down, fingers relaxed. Her pearl earrings caught a thread of morning light. To her left, Alicia clicked open a hard-sided folder, quietly laying out original documents, life estate deeds, notarized trust updates, beneficiary forms, dated transfers, asset ledgers. Nothing rushed, nothing missing. Across the aisle, Lauren sat rigid in a pale blue sheath dress, the kind designed to impress and soften at once. David sat beside her, shoulders hunched. He hadn't spoken much since they entered. His expression was unreadable, but his body leaned slightly away from hers, as if proximity had finally begun to feel like consequence. The judge, a woman in her late 50s, with dark-rimmed glasses and a patient mouth, adjusted her bifocals and looked over the two sets of filings. She didn't glance up immediately. She just read. Frances didn't fidget. She didn't clear her throat. She didn't look to Alicia for reassurance. She had already done everything that needed doing. Finally, the judge set down the papers and folded her hands. I see no grounds here for a trust challenge, she said, her voice low and final. All revisions are properly executed. All witness signatures certified. All notices filed within protocol. Ownership of the primary residence has been preserved under a life estate deed since 2008, and the recent transfer of successor rights to Miss Wells is legally sound. Lauren opened her mouth, but the judge held up one hand. Your emotional frustration, she said, does not create legal standing. Lauren sank back in her seat like a balloon losing air. Frances remained perfectly still. The judge glanced at her. Miss O'Connell, I rarely say this outside of probate disputes, but your documentation is some of the most thorough I've seen in my courtroom. If more people planned like you, we'd have fewer contested estates clogging the system. Frances offered a small, respectful nod. Thank you, Your Honor. The gavel came down, not harsh, but unmistakable. The kind of sound that settled arguments with permanence. Case closed. As the courtroom emptied, Alicia packed the documents with quiet efficiency. She didn't say anything until they reached the hallway outside. That went exactly how we expected. Frances looked straight ahead, as if the hearing were already stored behind her like a filed letter. It wasn't for surprise. It was for closure. Across the corridor, Lauren and David lingered near the exit. Lauren kept glancing toward Frances, hoping perhaps for a look, a moment, an acknowledgement. She didn't get one. David looked at Frances once, briefly, and then away. For the first time, he didn't try to explain, or smooth, or shield. He simply let the silence remain where it belonged. Frances walked past them without hesitation. Brenda was waiting by the elevator, dressed in a dusty gray suit that didn't match but didn't try to. She had a black umbrella tucked beneath one arm and a tote bag that looked like it had carried its share of truths. As the elevator doors opened, Brenda stepped inside, holding them for Frances. When they were alone, descending, Brenda turned and gave a half smile. That's what legacy looks like, she said softly. Upright. Frances didn't smile back, but her posture shifted slightly. shoulders straighter, chin lifted just enough to suggest something had been laid down and left behind. The elevator opened on the ground floor. They walked out into the sunlight. The community hall smelled faintly of fresh paint and lemon oil. It wasn't large, just a refurbished brick building tucked beside the old train station in East Sacramento, but its walls held history. Long tables had been arranged with modest floral centerpieces, and folding chairs lined up in neat rows faced a small podium draped in white linen. There were no velvet ropes, no gala orchestra, just sincerity and a hum of possibility. Frances stood at the edge of the room, watching a few volunteers place brochures into canvas tote bags, stamped with a simple green emblem, the O'Connell Fund for Future Nurses. The logo was Carly's idea. She'd drawn it by hand, 3 stylized hands overlapping, one holding a stethoscope, one holding a book, and one simply open. The design was clean, modern, unpretentious, like Frances had asked. Carly now sat cross-legged on the floor beside the registration table, typing on her laptop while Brenda affixed name tags with meticulous slowness. Full name, preferred name, and favorite pie, Brenda said with a small smile, gesturing at the last column of the form. Carly glanced up. Favorite pie? Shows personality, Brenda replied. And it's harder to fake than a resume. Frances smiled faintly, stepping over to examine the pile of printed applications Carly had brought from the printer that morning. You organized these alphabetically? She asked. I did, Carly replied. And I built the online portal too. Alicia already linked it to the trust. It goes live tonight. Frances picked up one of the forms and read the first paragraph aloud. This scholarship is intended for young women who show quiet strength, clear thinking, and a desire to leave things better than they found them. She paused, then folded the form neatly. That's better than anything I could have written. Carly beamed, but only for a second. They both knew what had been left out, and why. At the front of the room, a small poster board displayed the name Frances M. O'Connell, RN, above a black and white photograph of her in crisp whites outside St. Agnes Hospital, circa 1973. No long biography, no list of donors, no committee members. Just one line beneath it in block serif. Because some people don't need to ask for permission to do good. Brenda stood beside her, adjusting a chair. She glanced at the poster and then at the woman beside her. You gave them so much, she said softly, and they didn't even frame it. Frances kept her eyes on the photo. That's why I'm giving it elsewhere now. Later that week, the Lexus was listed for sale. Clean title, one owner, low mileage. The buyer was a young couple. She worked nights at a hospice center. He bartended on weekends. They'd been taking the bus to opposite shifts for 6 months and still showed up on time. When they met Frances in the parking lot, they were polite, understated, and quietly stunned by the price she offered them. It's worth more, the young woman said, pressing a hand over the check. Frances handed her the keys without flinching. Not to me. The full payment went directly into the fund's endowment. When Carly heard, she hugged her grandmother in silence. At the launch event, there was no mention of Lauren, no archival photos, no acknowledgments. Her absence wasn't glaring, it was intentional. The air was clearer for it. A local reporter covering the education beat asked Frances if the fund had been inspired by any family legacy. Frances held his gaze for a moment, then smiled politely. No, she said. It's for the girls who never get invited to the table but know how to build one themselves. Brenda clapped twice, softly. Carly did not look up from the name tag she was pinning to her sweater. The frame arrived, wrapped in brown paper, folded with care and taped like a gift from someone who understood restraint. No ribbon, no card, just a single strip of masking tape across the back labeled in Carly's handwriting. You'll know where to put it. Frances unwrapped it slowly, seated at her reading chair beneath the window that faced Brenda's garden. Afternoon light spilled over the pale carpet and onto her lap as she peeled away the last corner. She stared at the image for a long time. The photo was from the gala earlier that spring. Frances stood centered in the frame, head slightly tilted. That necklace, the one Lauren couldn't afford, glinting under chandeliers like it had its own pulse. Behind her, just out of focus, was Lauren. Her smile strained, her jaw tight, her eyes cast downward, like she'd just realized the ground beneath her had shifted. Frances traced the glass lightly with her thumb. It wasn't just a picture, it was a timestamp, a declaration. The precise moment the story began to turn. When Carly stepped through the front door with a tote full of grocery store flowers and seed packets, Frances held it up wordlessly. Carly grinned. Found it online. One of the gala photographers posted it as part of their press gallery. I figured it belonged here. Frances didn't speak for a moment. Then she set the photo gently on her lap and said, "That was the first night I stopped asking permission." They hung it beside her chair, just above the old side table where she kept her books and a tin of lemon mints. The frame was plain oak, the kind that wouldn't call attention to itself, only what it protected. 2 days later, an envelope arrived in the mail, addressed in looping blue ink. Inside was a thank you letter from the very first scholarship recipient. Dear Miss O'Connell, you don't know me, but I know your name now. Everyone in our class does. I didn't think I'd ever go to college. My mom was a nurse but never finished her license. I want to finish what she couldn't. Your fund makes that possible. I'll carry your name with me, quietly but proudly. Mayra G. Frances reread the last line twice, then set the letter down and folded her hands over it. Outside, the birds were fussing near the feeder. A distant lawnmower hummed somewhere across the neighborhood. But the quiet inside felt deserved. Brenda walked in a few minutes later, carrying 2 glasses of white wine and a half-opened bag of kettle chips. She set them both down and nodded at the envelope. "Another thank you?" she asked. Frances nodded. "Good, you deserve it." She raised her glass. Not bitter, just better. Frances raised hers in return. To earned endings. They clinked their glasses with a soft tap. That evening, Frances let the phone ring 5 times before flipping it face up. Lauren. The name blinked on the screen like it might apologize if left long enough. Frances didn't move. Eventually, the call went to voicemail. A few seconds later, a red badge appeared next to the messages icon. Frances didn't listen. She didn't need to. She simply tapped block caller, then placed the phone upside down on the table. Some doors didn't need to be slammed to be closed. They just needed to be quietly locked, with the key dropped into a river. The morning Alicia called, Frances was pruning the lavender near Brenda's porch, a pair of garden shears in one hand and a mug of cooled tea in the other. She answered with her elbow, shoulder pressing the phone to her ear as bees hovered lazily around the blooms. "It's done," Alicia said. "All pathways. Legal, medical, financial. There's nothing left with Lauren's name on it. Not even as a backup." Frances exhaled through her nose. Not relief exactly. Just the kind of breath you release when the last nail is driven in straight. "And Carly, sole controller," Alicia confirmed. "Medical proxy, trust executor, power of attorney in the event of incapacity. Her name's now the only one in every margin." "Good," Frances said simply. "That's how it should be." Later that afternoon, she made one last visit to the bank. The vault attendant greeted her by name, polite but curious, as she emptied the safety deposit box she'd once guarded like a second heart. The envelope of birth certificates, her nursing license, a folded handkerchief that had belonged to her mother. All of it placed gently into a canvas pouch, zipped shut and handed to Carly outside under the elm tree. "This is yours now," Frances said. "Not because of blood, because you showed me you'd carry it with care." Carly blinked quickly, nodded once, and didn't open the pouch. The next morning, Lauren posted a 3-line status on her social media account. No names, no tags. But the message spread like dried leaves, catching wind. Some parents die long before they stop breathing. Some choose silence like it's noble. I guess that's their legacy. It was screen captured within minutes, circulated among mutuals, and reposted by acquaintances who didn't know the full story, but had enough of it to speculate. Comments ranged from sympathetic to skeptical. A few tagged her. One replied, "Funny, thought your mom just launched a scholarship for women in STEM. Guess not dead yet." Frances didn't see the post immediately, but Carly did. She didn't respond. She didn't defend. She just walked to the desk where her grandmother kept her stationery and pulled out a pale blue note card from the drawer, the kind with a thin gold edge and no pre-printed sentiment. Frances wrote the message herself. "I'm not dead, just done." Carly mailed it with a single stamp. No return address. 3 days later, someone posted a photo of the note card online with the caption, "When the clapback is legally binding." The post exploded. By the end of the week, the O'Connell Fund's website had tripled in traffic. New donations came in from complete strangers, mostly women, many of them older, more than a few with daughters of their own. Someone started a hashtag #JustDone. Another user uploaded a fan edit of the gala photo, pairing Frances's emerald necklace with the note card quote in scrolling script. The image made the rounds on finance forums and women's empowerment pages. Frances didn't comment. She didn't need to. One evening, as rain tapped softly on the cottage windows, Brenda sat across from her on the couch, reading one of the printouts Carly had left on the kitchen table. "Did you know you're trending?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Frances looked up from her crossword. "That a good thing?" "Depends," Brenda said. "Some people build empires with less." Frances smiled faintly. "I didn't want an empire, just clean exits." Brenda nodded toward the mantel, where the framed gala photo hung beside a small ceramic bowl filled with spare keys and dried lavender. "You got more than that." Frances folded her crossword and set it down. "I got clarity, and silence, and my name back." She stood, walked to the window, and watched the rain begin to streak down the glass in quiet lines. Outside, somewhere beyond the wet hush, the world kept talking. Inside, Frances no longer had to answer to any of it. The day of the portrait session dawned quiet, overcast, the kind of gray light photographers dream about, soft, forgiving, timeless. Frances hadn't planned to do anything public this week, but Carly had asked gently, and Frances had learned, over time, which asks were worth answering. The photographer was a young woman named Rachel, who spoke in careful tones and wore a camera like it was part of her body, not an accessory. She arrived early to Brenda's cottage, scouting light through the bay windows and settling on the patch of porch where the vines had just started to bloom. Frances wore a navy sweater and slate trousers. Nothing dramatic, just clean lines and good fabric. The necklace stayed locked in its velvet case. She didn't need it anymore. Carly had gathered the first 3 scholarship recipients, each girl arriving with slightly nervous energy, dressed in their Sunday best, unsure if they were expected to smile or stand still. Frances made no speeches. She didn't offer direction. She simply walked to the center of the porch and stood beside them, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Rachel didn't pose them. She let them settle. One girl adjusted her collar. Another tucked a curl behind her ear. Carly gave a small thumbs up from behind the lens. The shutter clicked. That was it. 3 days later, the Sacramento Daily ran the image in its Sunday Metro section, with the headline "O'Connell, Quiet Matriarch, Bold Legacy." Brenda read the article aloud in the kitchen, while Frances stirred lentils on the stove, half listening until she caught the sentence. What began as a modest scholarship for girls in healthcare has become one of the most talked about independent endowments in the region, all under the stewardship of a woman who never once sought applause. Brenda lowered the page and looked at her friend. "You're in print now. No taking it back." Frances didn't reply right away. She finished stirring, turned off the burner, and wiped her hands on a linen towel. Then she walked to the bookshelf, near the fireplace, and cleared a small spot beside the necklace case, the one Lauren had once called gaudy and out of place. She placed the framed portrait there, just beside it. No explanation, no ceremony. Across town, Lauren's name had already begun to fade from the public version of the story. The gala committees no longer called. The networking circles had shifted their orbit. The unspoken math of legacy, who built what and who merely borrowed it, had done its work. That evening, Carly curled up beside her grandmother on the porch swing with a blanket across both of their laps. They sat quietly, watching dusk soften the sky. "I used to hear her say it all the time," Carly murmured. You were always the one she warned me not to emulate. Don't end up like your grandma, she'd say. So rigid, so embarrassing. Frances didn't flinch. She just looked out at the trees, where a pair of sparrows were building something small and deliberate. You were never embarrassing, Carly whispered, her voice firmer now. She was just afraid of what you made look easy. Frances turned her head slightly. What's that? Living without apology. The wind moved gently through the branches above them. Frances didn't answer. She didn't need to. Inside, the portrait stood still beside the necklace. Proof that some kinds of wealth can't be stolen, only inherited by the right hands. The dealership wasn't on her way anywhere in particular. Frances had taken the long road out of town, veering off the freeway just past the citrus groves where the scent of late summer hung thick in the air. She hadn't meant to stop, but the sparkle of polished glass and the curve of the showroom windows caught the corner of her eye, sleek machines arranged like jewels on velvet. She eased into the lot, pulling into a space beneath the only tree for blocks. The engine purred once, then fell quiet. For a moment, she didn't move. She simply looked. Rows of metallic sedans, smooth SUVs, models with names that promised speed or safety or status. All of them variations on a theme Lauren used to chase. But Frances wasn't there to buy. She just wanted to look at something without wanting it. She stepped out of the car. Inside the dealership, a young salesman glanced toward her with the reflexive brightness of commission, but she gave a soft shake of her head and kept walking, hands folded behind her back, eyes grazing the hoods like she was walking through a sculpture garden, not a showroom. Near the window, a crimson coupe sat under a spotlight. She paused in front of it, not for the car, but for the reflection. In the glass, she could see herself as she was now older. Yes, but composed. Shoulders straight, eyes steady. The years visible and claimed. She didn't fix her hair. She didn't step away. She pulled out her wallet and flipped it open, not for a card or credit, but for the small handwritten quote tucked in the back slot. The ink had faded just slightly, but the words still held. Inheritance is earned. Carly had written it after the first scholarship check cleared. Frances had carried it ever since. She didn't test drive anything. She simply turned back to the car she came in, the modest gray crossover Brenda had insisted on sharing. It wasn't glamorous, but it ran quiet, and the seat remembered her shape. Frances started the engine and pulled back onto the road. By the time she hit the coast, the sky had burned open into that high blue California stretch that made even the silence seem cinematic. The windows were down. The air tasted like salt and eucalyptus. Music played low from the speakers. Nothing modern, just soft brass and slow piano, the kind of score you don't notice until it wraps around you. In the glove box was a photo. Carly had slipped in without telling her. She reached over and pulled it out one-handed, glancing at it between curves in the road. It showed the three of them, Carly, Brenda, and Frances herself, standing in front of the community hall on launch day. Carly's hand rested lightly on Frances's shoulder. Brenda's smile was half tucked behind her sunglasses, and the emerald necklace caught just enough sun to flare like a quiet torch. Frances tucked the photo into the dashboard's edge, where it wouldn't rattle. Beside her on the passenger seat was an old frame Lauren had once used to display family quotes on the kitchen counter. The insert had been flipped. On one side, the original line still showed faintly beneath the glass. "Try not to embarrass us." Frances had crossed it out with a bold black slash. Beneath it, written in Carly's looping pen, "Try and stop me." The coastline stretched before her, infinite and unbothered. She didn't speed. She didn't linger. She just drove. No destination, just motion. And somewhere between mile marker 79 and the sound of wind curling through the open window, Frances smiled. A small, final smile. The kind that didn't ask permission. The kind that signed the last line of a story. They borrowed everything. I reclaimed it all, with one smile and one signature.